Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you might be in the world. We've just been speaking with two of our other Southern Hemisphere guests about tampering with balls, an important subject of an evening like this. If you're not from the Southern Hemisphere, well, if you don't follow cricket, you won't know what we're talking about. Good evening, everybody. We've got Bruce, Christian, Jonathan, and Philip there. Not sure where the others are. There should be some others here, but they're not here yet. In preparation for this one, I have a glass of wine because it's a full house, really, of, well, stories that we have to talk about but don't want to talk about. And first of all, and most importantly, I blame Bruce. Bruce, why are you flying near airliners?
Well, it's so hard to get good aerial shots of Boeing 777s that, sometimes you just got to get close. And the pilots, they just don't seem to understand what we're doing there. But actually, no, as you've alluded to, there's a big story covering the world at the moment. And let me try and quote from one of the stories. A drone was almost sucked into the engine of a 757, passed within 5 meters of the aircraft as it made its approach to Auckland International Airport. And of course, the media is running wild with this. It's another drone hysteria story. So I sat down and thought, let's do some maths on this. Now, if you take an average, say a Mavic or a Phantom-sized drone, and you've got some background clutter, such as you'd see if you're a pilot looking down on your approach to an airport, you can only really see that thing from about 200 meters away before it becomes inconsequential. Also, if you're a pilot on approach to an airport, you're flying your 777 at about 300 kilometers an hour, which is about 83 meters a second. And you're very busy because that's the busiest part of your flight, is the approach, where you're doing checklists, you're monitoring systems, you're making sure everything's working. So here you are, you're up to your eyeballs with the highest workload of the flight. And it takes just over 2 seconds from the time you can see that drone till the time it flashes past you. So unless you've got superhuman abilities, how can you first of all determine it's a drone and accurately judge the distance between you and that, or the aircraft and that drone? It kind of sounds a bit odd. And I think this is backed up by previous history. Now, we had a pilot flying into Heathrow who was sure he hit a drone. He was in the same situation, on approach, high workload, very high speed, or high speed, relatively speaking, and he determined that his aircraft had hit a drone. Turned out to be a shopping bag. So, yeah, it throws a bit of credibility issue into this. Then we have a pilot in Mozambique. He was sure his aircraft had a drone and the front was stoved in. Turns out it was just a structural failure, but he was sure. Remember, the pilots, for goodness sake. And then there was a pilot flying into an airport in Australia. He was sure he hit a drone. Turned out to be a fruit bat. So we have to weigh a lot of things up. Credibility. Well, did this pilot actually see a drone? And I think the jury's out, because we've got all these news reports and the only evidence we have is the testimony of one pilot. Now, here in New Zealand, we've got a pilots union called NZ-ALPA, and they have come out on many occasions demanding stronger drone regulation. And their position is very clear. They're pretty anti-drone, and they want drones regulated almost out of existence, like registration and tougher penalties and stronger controls. And so they've been making these press releases and getting no traction. The Civil Aviation Authority have said, no, we're doing very nicely, thank you. And the government's basically ignored them. And then, of course, just a few weeks ago, it was announced that there are trials taking place in New Zealand of pilotless taxis carrying people around. They don't need a pilot. So suddenly NZ-ALPA is probably thinking, oh my God, the future's arriving so quickly. We're all going to be out of jobs. Let's create some news. This is my view on the whole thing. I'm cynical. I'm very cynical. Based on past evidence, based on the science of the issue, I really don't think we can take a pilot's brief encounter with a drone as proof that a drone existed. But even if we assume it does, the Air New Zealand and Airways, which is our airspace controller, NZ-ALPA, are calling for tougher drone regulations. And to them, I'd say, well, hang on a minute. Anyone who flew a drone in that situation was already breaking the regulations. So what would toughening the regulations achieve? We're dealing with people who either don't know the regulations exist or people who choose to break them. And having tougher regulations will not influence the behavior of those two groups at all. The only thing we can do to improve the situation is to educate and enforce. But, that's what the CAA is recommending. They're going to get a digital media promotion to educate people. But the Airlines Pilots Union, the Airways Association, and Air New Zealand are all calling for tougher regulations. They don't understand the problem, so they'll never have a solution. They don't understand the problem. CAA in New Zealand is the only organisation that actually realises what the problem is and are working to address it. Even the government here, politicians are saying, oh, we've got to toughen drone regulations, because they don't understand the problem. And it really beggars belief that all these people in positions of power and authority are so stupid. And that's all I have to say about that.
Well, and I just read just before we came on air. I read that there's a problem in Canberra, in Australia, has also been cited, and I can blame Philip Rouse for that because him and Tridge and the others were part of that problem at the RG Pilot Unconference. You are adding to the noise. I think you've unmuted your mic there, Philip. Did you wanted to say something to this?
Look, I think I'll leave the Canberra one alone. But obviously here in Ballarat, we have exactly the same thing. We've got CASA, the Civil Aviation Safety Authority, has what I consider probably the world's best drone regulations, the most permissive regulations, but also they are very tight at the same time. A person can't just go and get a drone and fly anywhere. There's a standard operating conditions that they have to actually abide by. And if they're abiding by those, they're staying below 400 feet. They're staying 30 meters away from people. They're not flying over people. They're, not flying over property. And they're not being a nuisance. So the rules are already there. And if you have your license, then you can fly over certain things if conditions are met. And if your safety case allows it, which you have to present to CASA, if you want to fly over people, your safety case has to be pretty darn good. They do get issued once in a while. But the conditions to do this are strenuous. The rules are there. The rules exist. And then we get people calling for tougher regulation because there's people that aren't following the rules. And the same dilemma that Bruce mentioned, if people aren't following the rules, then how are more rules going to actually improve the situation? G'day, Lewis. And
it is madness, and it's a cyclical argument that we have, unfortunately, on this. We continually say this, and perhaps we need to level the playing field. I'm trying to do a link here. It's not going to go very well, this. We need to level the playing field. And one way we might level the playing field is by knowing where, because I think the drone community is pretty good at being able to get out of the way of manned aviation now, and it's getting ever better. More than 10 years ago, I saw vision-based detect, sense, and avoid that worked really, really well, and they had to dial it down because it was detecting birds lifting from fields and stuff like that. So I've said this before and ranting on about it, but one of the ways of making aircraft visible to us, if you will, is them making sure they're using ADS-B. 2020 is coming. And Christian, here we are. See, here's the link. This is what I'm trying to do it. Christian there from UAVionics is the man that sells that gear. And we put something in today. You had a deal with SenseFly today. It's been integrated in their new ground control station or something like that.
Yeah, exactly.
How are you going with making sure that the manned world is visible to us, Christian?
So we're sort of one of the few companies that have products both in drone space and manned space. So we've taken our technology that we originally miniaturized for drones, but we're selling into general aviation as well, right? So we're trying to leverage the cost basis and the investment that we've made in miniaturization now to serve GA traffic. We've got a TSO in process, so a certification of our first transponder in the US. And that is certainly a learning curve for us, but we're wrapping up what's called the environmental testing this week. And we're hoping to submit that full TSO package here in about 2 weeks' time. So, I was looking at some of the statistics this past week. In the U.S., as you mentioned, January 1st, 2020 is the mandate. We are still well under, say, call it 40% of the total equipage of who the FAA expects to mandate. In order to meet the deadline in the U.S. by January 1st, 2020, there's a pretty steep installation curve that has to occur. And it's going to be real hard for folks that have been holding out to start getting slots in the avionics shops. So we've taken a look at it from that perspective and tried to reduce the installation the installation cost based on some of our products, specifically designing for installation ease. So we'll be a player. We won't be a dominant player, but we'll be a player. And there's lots of ADSB mandates sort of growing worldwide. One of the newer movements that we've seen based on some of the activities that we've been doing in Europe is there's a new movement in Australia, New Zealand, the EU, and Canada now for how do we voluntarily or convince GA pilots to voluntarily equip with ADSB equipment, and how can we call it lower the requirements and cost for those solutions so that the pilot community will voluntarily choose to do so. And there's a real movement moving forward for portable systems like one we sell into the UK now. So it's a little portable solution, and I'll pull it up here in just a second, but it's a little portable system that you set on your glare shield, and it's an ADSB in and out solution, currently only legal in the UK, but the Australians and New Zealand and Canada are all exploring that possibility as well.
Well, they had an electronic conspicuity working group, didn't they? And they had lots of thinking going on about all of that. And I think one of the, unfortunately, Richard's not joined us yet. G'day to Rob and to Louis, of course. Where was I going with that? I was going with that they are not only thinking of ADSB, but of new ways that might come in the future as well, and realizing it's all got to plug into the system and be adopted at a faster rate. No, I'm not digging you with your ADSB, but ADSB is quite an old technology, and it's great that you've miniaturized it. But if you think in 1990 what your smartphone looked like and what your smartphone looks like now, that's really what you're what you're looking at in the rise of technology since then. So one of the problems, as I see with ADSB, is, I mean, how are there going to be enough codes for every drone in the world and every aircraft in the world to be equipped with that? How are you going to stop all the conflictions?
Yeah, so there's a couple problems. One is the number of ICAO codes, which you're referencing. There's only enough bits in the message space for something like 16 million total combinations. And then, but probably more importantly, there's a concern of overuse of the spectrum. The 1090 and 1030 spectrum are already used by the secondary surveillance radars and all of the TCAS systems and all the mode C transponders that are out there in the world. And there's a real concern about oversaturating that spectrum and degrading ADSB for everyone else in the world if everyone were to equip with ADSB out on board. We've addressed that from a couple of different perspectives. One, we've never really advocated that every drone be equipped. That would seem kind of silly for all the folks that are operating within visual line of sight within the rules of Part 107 in the US and all of the sort of the equivalent operational rules worldwide. It seemed kind of silly and overkill to have that solution there. But for solutions that operate at higher altitude, solutions that operate in controlled airspace, systems that operate beyond line of sight, it certainly is a large mitigator from a safety perspective, not the only mitigator, because it requires other cooperative aircraft to be equipped. Just sort of factoring out those use cases of just the within line of sight, you're really taking off probably a vast majority of the market right now in terms of use cases. So you're probably cutting out 70 to 80% of if not more of those uses. Other ways that you may have seen us advocate for are low power ADSB, and low power ADSB preserves spectrum. It's only visible, say up to a mile, depending on how high of a power you broadcast. And then most recently, we released a white paper where we're talking about something that we call inert and alert. And inert and alert means that it's basically not in broadcast mode, it's in listen mode. And if an aircraft with ADSB out comes near you, then you start to broadcast to let them know they're there. So you're only broadcasting sort of if needed be. And that takes away ADSB from a tracking technology right? And but preserves it really for a safety technology, collision avoidance, staying well clear. But it's probably we have to agree that it's probably not a great idea to have ADS-B on every drone out there. It's just sort of not what the system was designed for. And there's other better solutions that we can design into the system.
I think one of the things with that one is the ADS-B that you guys have done. Obviously, we've had support in ArduPilot for that for quite a long time now. We started putting that in 2000. Was it beginning 2016 or was it late 2015?
Yeah, something like that. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I think it was 16. Yeah, and the manner in which it operates, like you'll be flying along in your fixed-wing aircraft or whatever, doing surveying thing. Say a crop duster comes over the field who happens to have an ADS-B fitted, and your aircraft will automatically dodge out of the way. So it's really, really simple. It's really easy to do. And in a situation like that, you don't need to be broadcasting to the crop duster. You just get the hell out of his way, and there won't be a problem.
Right.
So the system works really, really well.
And very, very and relatively cheap. I mean, this is the if you can see, that's what we have called Ping RX. That's the ADS-B receiver that plugs right into the ArduPilot Pixhawk autopilots. I mean, this is $200 US, right? I mean, it's pretty cheap comparatively to I think a lot more OEMs are starting to design solutions like this directly in.
Well, that's where, manned aviation's got to come to the party. If it wants to keep whinging on about, there's a drone. Well, hang on, our world can get out of the way, and not only ADS-B, vision-based, all manner of things. There'll be all manner of ways of getting out of the way. You just tell us where you're coming, and it's interesting you mentioned crop dusters. There, Philip. There is only one I've seen in South Africa. I've only seen one fitted with ADS-B. They come past it not every day, but a lot. And there's only one I've seen in the country, and that's operating because we've got a chain of receivers here, and so we're tracking for about 500 kilometers, and there's only one. So the manned aviation has got a lot of catching up to do if it wants to keep flying in the lower airspace, which belongs to us, all of us now. But that's the way it's going to be. That's what Amazon. That's what everyone's spending the big bucks on. Urban air mobility. That's what they all want it for. They want that at that lower
the question there is, what's a human life worth? Fitting an ADS-B to an aircraft. If you own a helicopter and you're not willing to fit ADS-B out to your helicopter, like really all the things you've got in your aircraft, your headset is probably worth more than the ADS-B out system that U Avionics makes. So what are your passengers worth? If you're that worried about it, I mean, flying into a Pelican in Australia, I mean, those things are massive. In a Robinson 44 is going to do a lot of damage to your pilot. You can't do much about that because it's, fitting ADS-B to Pelicans, I don't think is something you guys are going for. But,
we'll have to look into that. I'm going to take a note.
Don't give them ideas, mate.
But actually, I do that. We fit collars to vultures and stuff like that. But anyway, we do that. But that leads very nice. But tracking is thought of, I think, by a lot of pilots as an imposition. And that's all very well. What are you doing? You're tracking me and what I do. And that works very well until you need to be found. And then the second you need to be found, tracking becomes very, very serious and very, very important. And now this leads us very nicely, actually, to Rob and Jonathan, and who I hope we're now going to have like a big argument. What's the headline? Let's grab the headline or the act.
A big argument. We're buddies. Why would we argue?
Oh, because that makes for a better gig, doesn't it? But Safeguarding America's Skies Act of 2018, I can shoot any drone down I want to now. It's open season. What's going on? Rob, you tell me, you wrote some of that. What on earth are you doing, Rob? What have you done?
Well, once we were alerted more publicly, let's say, that foreign people may be using drones in nefarious ways to collect data, on sensitive locations here in the United States. We started digging around and found some folks on the Hill that were supporting this kind of thoughts that, we think in the coming years, people are going to be using these more and more for weapons to come after large crowds and other places. So we should be more proactive than reactive, because you can only imagine a pandemonium if, people start using these things widespread. So we started on the Hill and convinced some people to go ahead with endorsements after speaking to many different agencies across the whole United States government, basically, to sort of gather some consensus from people. One thing we did was we were working on language in conjunction with the NDAA, which is the National Defense Authorization Act 2018, and basically convinced them that the liability of someone who's a property owner adjacent to a prison would be exactly the same as adjacent to a military base. And they agreed upon that. And so we were able to, for the protection of military soldiers, enact that. And so now we're pushing forward with, the same bit of language to say, in essence, that federal agencies, certain critical infrastructure workers, and also certain law enforcement. And I have many different ideas on how that should work, and Jonathan probably does too. But that was a framework. Now, I don't know if the bill will pass, but we've put it out there, and people are going to be talking about it now. And I was shocked when the NDAA went through the way it did. So I'm thinking it's not going to be everyone can use this technology. It's going to be specific laid out guidelines. But the CUS movement is moving.
Well, let's jump that across to Jonathan. What was your thoughts on all of this?
Well, I think it's needed in some regards, because DHS, DOJ have legitimate needs to actually counter some of these bad drones.
But it opens up, doesn't it open up the electronic, no, what are you calling it over there? Not electronic conspicuity, it's your electronic tracking. I've forgotten what you're calling it over there.
Oh,
but
okay,
remote ID. Remote ID, isn't it? That's a remote ID. So it's opening the door for that, isn't it? Now, who is lining up to be the gatekeeper for remote ID? And I think it's a perfect time to discuss this. Now we've just had this big Facebook data scandal, because to a certain extent, that's the sort of thing you're getting with remote ID. You're getting to see where people are flying their commercial flights, and that's valuable data. I don't know. Someone, that was a bit of a rant. Someone want to pick that up? No.
Yeah, I'll pick it up. I'll touch it. They've made just in a meeting I was just in, they've clarified now that remote ID and tracking, as it's called, that tracking is less of a priority, because they've found so many problems with just the initial ID. And I don't believe there's any but one that has a solution just yet, because I believe in point of sale should be registered and a bunch of other things, but how do you wrangle back the 3 million drones we think are out there or more? So I don't see much compliance there. I see another year of arguments at least. So it's time for people to, put their words out there and see how they feel about this, because at the end of the day, something's going to change in remote and ID tracking before they're going to allow many more commercial operations or expansion.
Yeah, did everyone realize that DJI are making a big announcement tomorrow? Do you think it could be something like this? Because it says changing the way we work. Yeah, I tend to think it may be something involved in the use of drones, not drones itself, but how we use them, i.e. Tracking systems or beaconing or transponders, whatever. And since DJI has the lion's share of the market, if they release a system and then make it available to other drone users or drone manufacturers, what are the chances that they could own that piece of market space?
Well, they've not gone off to a blinding start with their current system. We can't say too much about that, but we know various things.
Fantastic.
What are you proposing to sell? The actual license plate? What you think someone's going to capitalize on a number and get paid some money from that? If there's anyone that's going to do it, it's the government. It's not going to be a private citizen. And I've heard some talk about the UTM giants saying they're going to rent out airspace. That's a laugh.
Well, you say it's a laugh. They've one of them, and they're not a UTM giant. They're a UTM dwarf, in my opinion. But they've they've bought a LoRa. They've bought into a LoRa company, and they're getting ready for to have their electronic tracking devices all of their own. So that it's definitely in their thinking. But that's hang on, I haven't got any tinfoil nearby. That's a bit of a conspiracy theory. But you know, otherwise, why would they have bought into a LoRa tracking company?
Come on, there are de facto standards and there are common usage standards. If a big company like DJI wants to impose the standards, they have the market's umbrella to capitalize on that. Is it good? Is it bad? It really depends if they want to play fair.
Well, we know they're not going to want to play fair on that one, but as far as standards are concerned, if they try and implement a standard, because they're not open in any way, shape or form, that makes it a little bit difficult. They'd have to actually open that technology for other people to use for that to become a standard. So I'm not really too faced with that. We've had a lot of talks, you know, within the ArduPilot dev team about different methods of potentially allowing people to transmit a bit of information, whether it be a you know, FAA registration number or an ID number of some sort that identifies the system. There's plenty of ways of doing this if someone with any actual decision-making power wants to sit down and figure out how it could be done without pandering to some big company. It wouldn't be very hard for them to contact a dev team or someone like that, you know, with access to a significant amount of the market. Yeah. Obviously, we've got all of the other autopilots out there as well, the PX4 team, we've got, you know, Paparazzi, Multi-Wii, whatever, all the racing drones. All of these people, all of these teams, they're all open source and they're all willing to chat. It wouldn't be that big a deal to get many of them communicating.
No, it's not. And we've, as Philip says, we've discussed this far and long too many times at ArduPilot dev team. And that's always a problem of balance. And should we go for develop a standard of our own, or embrace and extend an existing system? It depends. But what I'm saying is, at the moment, there are commercial entities that have the power to impose the de facto standards, and that's a problem.
Yeah, well,
you're right,
so, you know, right. Broadcast, the technology exists. It's the communication standard that needs to be set. And what I, you know, in the ARC recommendation for Mode ID and in what the UAS office and the FAA said over the past couple of weeks is that you know, there's going to be two sets of communication protocols, maybe even three if you consider one. But one of them will be network-based, i.e. LTE 5G. One of them will need to be broadcast-based, meaning something like ADS-B, but not ADS-B. And then there's another solution that Rob alluded to that would be only ID, and that would be very akin to using an app to say I'm flying in this general vicinity, right? So you're not tracking the drone itself. But the problem, you know, that I heard directly from the FAA in a one-on-one conversation was they don't want to pick an industry winner. Therefore, they don't want to see what the standard is, right? They don't want to set the standard based on any one given company's technology. So, you know, they're going to be putting forth performance-based standards, but the performance-based standard is going to tell you how good your GPS needs to be or how far it has to broadcast or something along those lines. It may be what's in the message, but not necessarily what the protocol looks like. And from a tracking perspective, that's a big problem. You know, you're going to have solutions that listen to Wi-Fi and Bluetooth and something RF based and something LTE based. You're going to have this multitude of receivers that can decode the various signals. There's no doubt that if DJI were to, you know, pick their solution, they've got 70% of the market covered, but that's really not necessarily open to rest of industry, or at least they haven't made it so yet.
But isn't there a push now to privatize a whole lot of this stuff? And what better solution for the FAA than to have DJI come along and say, we can immediately enable 70% of the drones out there with this system, and we can make it available to all other drone companies or operators. They can buy off us, and we can provide you with the infrastructure, the technology you need to use this stuff. basically privatize this aspect of the market to us, and you've got an overnight solution. All your problems go away. And I mean, it's a very
I've been in the room in
in
that exact conversation between FAA and DJI, and again, FAA doesn't want to pick a winner, whether it's DJI or Avionics. They're not going to pick a winner, even if it solves the
fair
problem.
competition and stuff. And also, DJI, I don't think they can provide the infrastructure. I mean, how are they going to provide the infrastructure? If you guys can solve that,
it from China.
They'll have the infrastructure.
Sure.
Don't worry. You give them the ticket, they'll have the infrastructure. They'll have it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
You know how much they're worth.
That's billions and billions of dollars, you know.
Yeah.
They could buy the FAA.
But I think we have to put all of this into context. We're talking about making technical solutions that are far greater than is anything than is available in manned aviation. We're talking ahead of the manned aviation game and ahead of and leading the way in some ways in which it's not too much hyperbole that air traffic will work in the future and stuff like that. And it's not next gen stuff, because next gen is just like so yesterday. They haven't even rolled that out yet. So we're thinking very far ahead of the regulators. We need to slow down a bit, maybe. I don't know. Rant over. Let's someone else. Quick, save me from this rant.
No one wants to pick.
I was just going to say also, with all of these solutions, remember that a number of drones that are going to be affected by this are things like your racing drones, which don't have transponders on them. They don't need transponders on them at all. I mean, they barely go above 10 foot above the ground. And yet they're going to be judged the same way. So, you know, the suggestion out there is also using light flashing transmitters and stuff like that to transmit rego, which we actually did crunch some numbers on one of the dev calls, and that's actually quite practical. But, you know, a 60 frames per second mobile phone can actually decode quite a number of regos through a flashing code on an aircraft. There's a bunch of cheap and easy ways that could be done, and I think, you know, someone actually saying this must be done, we don't care how you do it, this must be done. If that happens, then the industry is actually capable of doing it quite quickly and pretty much overnight. So I'm not too concerned.
But what about? Well, Rob, you were there. You were in the room. You were there when they were. What is the concern? What is the big concern? Is it really manufacturers doing nefarious stuff with data? Or is it just too many kids getting them for Christmas? And by the way, I really this 70% number that's coming up for DJI all the time now. When you could track the registrations properly, which you can't anymore, they never got above 50%. I'm not entirely sure. It might be 70% of drones in the bottom of a cupboard somewhere, but and not unpacked after Christmas. But anyway, but Rob, why are people getting so upset over there about it all? Why bringing this shit down?
You know, when I was in the room, we discussed nefarious acts that I can't repeat in public. But, you know, when they give the numbers on the drones that were used for that, it's slightly more than 70%. So the people that are the asset owners and the people that are worried about nefarious actors, not the people who are worried about just, you know, careless people flying, you know, they're really concerned with DJI, and they're concerned with privacy issues too, because there's been operations. This isn't like a weekend flyer straying over some critical infrastructure. This is an op. You know, there's scheduled times, scheduled flights, and they found traces of data that related to them, you know, at one instance, collecting license plate data of people going in and out of a secure location. You know, stuff like that really gets people worried, because then they have numbers like, you know, we're feeling of the one call we get, you know, there must be hundreds of other stuff going on that you know, there's no way for us to do anything. Then the law enforcement say they show up to a scene, and it's just like nearly impossible to find the guy operating the thing. So they hope with the ID and tracking to have some kind of fingerprint to be able to, you know, come back on someone, just like a gun, for instance, that has a manufactured serial number. You know, that's what they're looking for. And they realize that, you know, the bad people, there was all these scenarios of people altering drones, and at what level they've altered the drone to what severity of crime they're going in to seek. And I'm being intentionally vague because I was asked not to speak about that, but you know, and sometimes too, they're saying that the threat has been escalated enough that they don't know if there's explosives inside of a drone or not, so that they're just going to treat that like it's explosives now. So we may see a more heightened awareness when a nefarious drone comes down in a crowded area or something like that. You know, when you call out the SWAT, people start to get nervous. And I mean, that's just how it's going to go down. So they need some kind of like remote ID tracking system to be able to say, hey, the drone came from someplace. And I hear that there's ways around that, sure, but they have to do something and show that they're doing something. Because if they don't, and then it comes up that they could have found the guy, it always happens that way. It comes back later in the news. Oh, well, there was cops right there when the guy was doing the bad thing, and if they would have just known this info and turned around, they would have seen him. You know, it's the same deal. They can't get everybody, but they got to do something.
This is crazy. Is there some kind of paranoia in the USA? Because we've had people killed with trucks, we've had people killed with pressure cookers. No one's been killed with a drone yet. We've got all this hysteria about drones.
It's a psychological perception, man. If you're at a football game and someone flies a drone down and you found out there's a chemical agent there and it's one of your weekly UK games, how many people's there? 50,000? And then they're like, okay, evacuate the stadium. How's that going to look? How's it going to look the next weekend after that?
Yeah, well, I'd rather live on my, live on my feet than die on my knees. People are capitulating to this fear thing, that the whole hysteria about drones, they're evil. No wonder we get so many complaints, because people have been taught that if you see a drone, you're going to be spied on. It's a potential threat to your safety.
That's changed. They said that the fact that people reporting people that way has changed now, and that they're seeing more accurate data about locations and what they think they're up to. It's no longer like the UFO pilot sightings thing. And the data's gone up. You know, a year ago this time, they were getting like 30 incidents a month. I heard it's up to 3,000 and 4,000 now a month. I mean, that's pretty significant.
But I think a lot of it's driven by the media and the hysteria they've created over drones. It's not borne out by the facts. Where are all these drone-driven disasters and attacks and things? They're just not there. It's like it's trendy. We just should be dealing with reality.
They actually are there. We can't speak about it because it gives people ideas, because they're so ingenious and simple. They've got hand guides now to do everything that they need to do. So it's not like that we're going to share this information openly.
Yeah, but have they happened? I mean, I haven't read reports of them happening. There's always a potential for anything to be misused, but I don't see the reports of drones being used to drop nerve agents or to kill people or whatever.
What about did you hear about the Mexican drone that had an attached ordnance to it, like a claymore that was dangling from the bottom of the drone? They caught those guys on the border. It was like one article about it. Stuff like that, they say, is happening all the time with explosives. Either they're finding explosives on the people with drones, or they're finding them in some manner in which they're attaching them. These are the cartels. This isn't ISIS anymore. That's our border.
Yep.
So we're not just going to say this isn't happening. It's happening.
But how many people die due to firearms use in Mexican cartels?
Yeah, but that's a different argument. They don't care about that. We got a thing called the Mansfield Bar here. You know, one movie actor in the 60s died, and they changed that. It's a requirement to this day. The American system's fickle, but if you sketch enough people out, they're going to react. And something like this is very psychologically damning. People don't want to have to deal with stuff like this. So
yeah, we're creating victims of fear.
Well, fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and then FOMO and all those other things. And you say simplicity, Rob, and Amazon, if they really want to get on with the drone delivery business, they only need to speak to chaps that fly into prisons day in, day out with deliveries, because they've got to be the world's #1 delivery drone experts now. They know how it's done. And one of the, you say simplicity, one of the ways I know they use is they fire arrows with stuff taped over the wall. So yeah.
I think one of the things with the registration is identifying good actors, so you don't actually have to stress about them. And I think that's probably the better way to probably make that argument is, if there is a drone in an area, you can tell whose it is. You know they're not a bad player. That's good. It's the drone that turns up that's actually bypassing the system. Well, you can't detect it. You know you can't detect it, et cetera, et cetera. So therefore, the risk level goes up. So being able to make those decisions. So tracking from that point of view doesn't bother me so much. What bothers me is when all of a sudden they get these lovely tools for shooting down drones, and they use them, say, in the Gold Coast in Australia in the last couple of days when the aircraft wasn't even in the no-fly zone, allegedly. You know, I'm sorry, but if I know some of the people that use the Cube on their drones have also got red epics hanging underneath their things. You know, a dual red epic hanging underneath a Pixel 2 Cube powered drone getting shot down by the police. Well, there's $1 million. Who's paying that bill? Because someone thought, oh, there's a drone, I better shoot it down, without actually doing some little bit of research. I mean, the paranoia around it is actually a serious threat, and it's actually a serious threat to law enforcement as well, because if these tools propagate out there, I can guarantee that bad players are going to be getting these tools to be able to take down police drones as well. I mean, you throw a good tool for a good purpose out there, and bad players are going to use it. So if you're saying that the drones are going to be used for bad purposes, then I can guarantee that the anti-drone tools are going to be used for bad purposes.
Things change. You know, you guys were aerospace modelers, and now you've been thrown into multinational cyber espionage and aviation. You know, so that's new. Things change, and that's where we are.
Well, that's true, isn't it? So where do we start? You know, my 14 now, what is he now? Anyways, several years old boy now. Has he got to register everything and do everything and be seen? I mean, it's a bit much in some ways, isn't it?
I think so. And you know, we're always open for ideas. That's where we're at right now. I mean, how do we do this? You know, what's an idea from one of you guys? How would you ID people in a way that people could sort of track at least the good people down, you know what I mean? But still retain people's rights and a level of security, but then also, you know, be able to, address the people that's been doing things good for decades, and also have them somehow register and be able to comply with, you know, at least some sensible laws. That's where we are.
Did the AMA...
New Zealand? Oh, hang on a minute. I've got to answer my phone.
Yeah. Did the AMA come to the table?
We have the topic, for instance, of the drone registration. What stops someone to steal a drone and use it for nefarious purposes? Who hasn't heard of the story of a guy that is woken up by the police because his car was stolen and used to rob a bank? That's the same thing will happen with drones, not only the unidentified drones, but also stolen drones. And we see this with cars. So everything that is registered on an owner can be used for nefarious purposes, either by the owner or by someone else that subtracts it from the owner. So I really don't know.
That's, you know, remote ID is not going to solve the folks that are out there with specific ill intent, right? Your remote ID is for the careless and the clueless, right? The guys that are either honest guys that need to be kept honest, or just people that don't know what they shouldn't be doing, and there's a way to track them down and say, hey, don't do that again, right? A remote ID certainly isn't gonna stop someone that wants to hang a grenade off the bottom of it. They're not going to broadcast their solution to everyone, right? So, you know, it's really just a cooperative way to say, hey, I want to play by the rules. Here I am, and if you need to track me down, you've got a way to track me down, and let me know if I'm doing something wrong, and I'll do it right the next time.
Exactly.
You know, the more that happens, you know, that's the way it'll start. The more that happens, DJIs and other OEMs of the world will start to build in the technology to their boards that, can't be disabled easily. I won't say they'll never be unable to be disabled, but they can't be disabled easily. So someone doing something stupid near an airport might actually be able to be tracked down so that you can enforce it. Right now, we talked about the lack of enforcement. There's no real technical way that we can use to enforce someone who did something stupid and flew near a 757 on approach. We don't know who that was.
It was Bruce. So, it was always Bruce. Always.
Right. Especially now that he's on the phone and can't defend himself.
Yeah, exactly. It's always Bruce. It's always Bruce.
And I think that's where the conversation needs to stay at. It's identifying the person that goes down to their local, hobby store, buys something, doesn't quite understand the rules, flies, they get detected that they're flying in an area that's not really appropriate. police officer comes to them and says, you know, here's a little leaflet, here's the rules, you shouldn't be flying there, off you go, there's your warning. If that's where this technology can actually be used for good. You know, but for some reason we keep focusing on worst case disaster scenarios that if someone wants to create mass panic or mass whatever, there's a billion and one methods they can do it. Why do we have to keep focusing on that when we've got technology that actually does have useful purposes and can be used easily for those purposes? Why don't we focus on the actual scenarios that happen on a daily basis? People flying in areas they're not quite meant to fly in, but they don't know. Just the normal stuff. The same reason why you've got a registration number on your car. It's not, you don't have a registration number on your car because someone might use it to break into a prison. You've got a registration number on your car so the police can tell you off every time you go, 2 kilometers an hour over the speed limit, so that they educate you. That's what it's for.
Only 2 kilometers per hour over the speed limit, Philip? You're being...
it's 3 in Australia.
Australia's pretty fierce. It's pretty fierce.
3 kilometers an hour over bad
I believe trying to get legislation to cover all the edge cases that were mentioned is ridiculous. You have to get the sensible legislation, and that's it. And the corner cases will always be there. You can kill someone with a kitchen knife, and it's a knife that is used usually to cut bread. So,
you're giving it away a bit there, Louis, aren't you? Your knowledge is quite exceptional.
Yeah.
It's
next phone call shortly, Louis.
Seems to know it. Yeah. But Rob, with the AMA, where's the AMA been in all these discussions?
AMA wasn't at the meeting, and they were silent. Amazon was there, and they were silent. But they're not always available at these things.
But Amazon were there. What can I fish out of that? Well, what on earth were Amazon doing there? They just deliver stuff to me via a van. They don't deliver to South Africa. But anyway, that's another story. Too much stuff gets stolen here. Why were they there? Why do they keep getting invites?
Well, they have a stake in the drone issues, and they want to make certain that the counter drone thing's done correctly because they have a lot of packages they need to secure in the air. I mean,
but they haven't made. All they've done is here's the rant hat. I should get a rant hat. All they've done is create dozens and dozens of patents for things that they've never made, and they haven't. They're trying to monopolize everything. I think they're forced for bad. For evil.
Sounds like that to me. I don't support Amazon in that manner. I think anyone trying to make the airspace not available to everyone and charge a fee is out of their minds, and I don't see it going anywhere. And anyone who supports ATC privatization as well. The main concerns is that the ID will be done correctly, and it's kind of like, what do you do first? Do you build the counter machines first without an ID system, or you try to build an ID system and then a counter drone systems around that? Because what would be really nice is if someone that didn't know they were flying in some spot got an alert or something somehow, told them, hey, you shouldn't be flying here, regardless of which manufacturer. That would be nice. And then back to your guys' thing about how the UTMs would work, I would like to see what I consider a backyard UTM, in which that you have an area set up that's designated, and then the area is either hot or not, and it could be several square miles, and then you're dependent on your signals going out from one transceiver into a computer that goes online to give the information back to some other kind of place. That's how I would envision a backyard UTM of some way working.
Well, funny enough, you can use that right now. If you just pop to the drone safety map on SUS News at the top, and that's using Altitude Angel to do that, or if you happen to be an ArduPilot user, and that is built into Mission Planner, you can do exactly that now. And then, of course, you can have one of Christian's ADS-B receivers attached to your autopilot as well. Oh, my word. Are we already all doing it?
That sounds great. So now you have to take all that equipment down and let the FAA kick the tires on it and say that it's good.
But
The
it
FAA
already
had
is.
access to all of this for a long time. The FAA can, you're like, if they're too arrogant to turn up to a dev call and send someone to actually meet some of the dev team, I'm sorry, but it's actually not up to community members that are already volunteering their time for the world's best autopilot.
Well, don't do it then. I support your equipment. I think it's great. But here's the problem: is they're not going to design a solution for you to use. Why should they do that? Plus, drones, there's no money there. The airlines make so much more money than drones. So, like, why should you waste the FAA's time with drones? I mean, we can turn it around like that.
We have solutions.
But it's interesting, isn't it?
They're not so much worried about that anymore. They think it's funny. You guys don't have any solutions that work or are certified. So until that day, maybe we'll get worried then.
Well, the certification is an interesting thing, isn't it? Because that's something you had to do when men were in the loop, and when men and women were in the loop, if things were far more dangerous, because they tend to switch. If there's a big red switch in a cockpit that says "Don't touch this," someone will touch it.
Yeah, the dog's there, right?
The dog, exactly. The dog's there. Exactly.
Well, they sit there and watch a light until their aircraft crashes because they don't know why the light's flashing.
You said it, not me. Have you got one of those in your Harrier?
I've read all the accident reports, man. Machines are smarter, but here's the problem: is the data link. I mean, these things aren't secure. You're talking on the phone, it goes out, other stuff goes out. A backyard UTM would probably work, you know, and it wouldn't be that expensive to get certified. Once people say these certification things, they're all crying and saying we shouldn't do it, but you know, that's the industry has to pay for that. Name another industry where the government pays for all the research and, you know, pays for everything for them. None.
But isn't it interesting though? I think that Christian and some of the UTM guys and other people and the autopilot guys are thinking, if it's a game of chess, there's several moves ahead. They're already thinking, well, hang on a minute, this is quite good, right? We're having to play with Altitude Angel, having to play with ADS-B. Well, that sort of works. They're looking at it. But developers now can iterate new and better systems. But, you know, they'll send the paperwork into the FAA now and they'll say, oh, hang on a minute, we could do it a better way than this in like 6 months' time. And
you're absolutely right. We have to lead by example, right? And some of the things that we put forward may not work, but we team up with others that have pieces of the puzzle, whether it's Altitude Angel, RG Pilot, you know, even counter UAS systems to create you know, a ecosystem of systems that can help demonstrate that these possibilities will work. I don't see much changing over the next couple of years. You know, we're getting ready to announce a couple of 10 plus IPP programs here in the US. We don't know what they're going to be, how big they're going to be, how small they're going to be, but they're going to be more examples of how things could work. We talk about certification, but there's no certification standard for something like this. That's you know, that's
you can't create it,
part of the
and that's what they're waiting on.
Yeah.
But are they willing to hear? Are they willing to open their minds to technology being able to evolve quicker than the 30-year time scale of ADS-B? You know, it's 30 years. People are getting it's coming out in 2020. They were thinking about it in 1990. It's a 30-year-old standard.
Gary, at least for something, it's good. It still works.
It still works, but they haven't even managed to roll it out to all the aircraft, the full-size manned aircraft. If they're actually genuinely worried about manned aircraft safety, then why have we got mum and pop flying their little ultralight around in the same airspace as everything else, actually well above 400 feet, with no ADS-B? And they're worried about a drone. Well, you know, a little Cessna 150.
You got to think about who it was designed for. It was designed primarily for air traffic control and air traffic services in the ANSPs, and only secondarily for air-to-air interactions or avoidance of interactions, right? And so they're still in that mindset, right? This is designed for IFR aircraft at altitudes in controlled airspace in order to maximize, you know, a route and the efficiency of a route. And only secondarily for, you know, recognizing the air-to-air benefits of, you know, dare I say collision avoidance, but it's more like self-separation, right? So, and that's where it comes, you know, it's really important. And, you know, some states like the UK and Australia seem to be starting to realize that and wanting to make it less expensive because, certification is no joke from a cost perspective, right? We're learning that now as a small company. I've been through it with big companies, right? It's no joke, and we have to ultimately pass that on to the consumer, which means less people buying our stuff because it's X dollars more than it would have been otherwise. It's a challenge.
I think it's. Did anyone see? We'll move into any other business sort of frame of things. Did anyone see the Porsche? Was it Porsche or Ferrari? One of those posh car companies, urban air mobility estimations of how many vehicles they were going to get out there, and they're going to have them running by 2025, certified and
was it
running.
32,000 or something?
Yeah, by 2025, and they're going to have. Just to make sure it all happens easily, they're going to have a pilot, a certified pilot in each one of those urban. I've forgotten the name of the acronym. Don't worry, it'll change next month. It'll be a new one. So there's no requirement to remember any acronyms in this game. So they change so quickly. Urban air vehicle, no, urban air, whatever it is, urban air mobility. But yeah, so. It's straight away.
We already have something called a helicopter that does this exactly.
There you go. There you go. Yes, it's called a helicopter. It has a certified pilot sat in it. Yeah.
Come on, Gary. And what about the certified balloonist?
Yeah.
Well, all of you Johnny-come-latelys can be on your way. And they were the first autonomous vehicles as well, of course, going into. Where was it? Sicily or something like that with bombs. Anyway,
the first fully autonomous vehicle was in Australia, and it was quite a few thousand years ago. Had a return to home function. It's called a boomerang.
Very good, very good. So yes, no, that's good. This is turning into because it's very serious subjects, and I hate it when I can't argue too much with the people that come on here because you're all saying the sensible right things, except for Bruce, of course. He never says the sensible right things. And that
we were known for ranting too.
Yes. So does anyone else see any other stories this week that has caught their eyes?
I can say something unreasonable is that when I first began this journey back in September, that the DoD pretty much wanted to ban all drones, including AMA, modelers, anything that flies. And for 3 months, I worked hard to make certain that wouldn't happen. And then, we're on another round now because they've actually done an economic study. So that's always looming around that hardly anyone knows about except for people on the Hill. And it's crazy to me. It sounds crazy.
What do you mean economic study? What do you mean by that?
They were a group of investigators through the DoD was funded for an economic study on what the impact of downing all RC vehicles would be.
But I think Patrick, who's been in the comments, hands up all those that can remember the chap that was fitted up by the FBI that put some C4 into a model fan. No, before him. Fitted up. Because they saw model jets at a meet, and they were very, very surprised at what a model jet could do. And also, there was some bloke in New Zealand that. Anyway,
that bloke in New Zealand that only catches smoke and a black plastic bag and says there's a jet inside.
Yeah, but I think there's the pulse jet. Anyway, there's been I think that there's been a sort of anti-modeling push or pen them in push for quite a few years, don't you think, Rob? Or they got more serious?
I think so, and I think they've screwed up. I don't really want to talk about AMA and stuff. I'm hoping that they'll come to their senses and want to speak to me. But in that case, they had the whole industry turn their backs on them. They made a couple of backroom deals, and it didn't work out well for them because these greedier folks, they want to make their money at all costs. So the people that got tossed under the bus once it was unfavorable was, AMA.
Yeah.
So you can look at all your other industry people and all the coalitions, all those folks. I've always supported AMA, and I told them since day one that, these were your problems and this is what you should try. And so I'm going to bring up a belief I had back in 2014, which doesn't seem like a bad idea now given the circumstances, but they were adamantly opposed to back then. So we'll see what shakes out from that.
Oh, and how hard is the tree shaking at the moment? When should we expect apples to fall and stop falling?
Not until they make a release. That would be months from now. These things always take a while. You got to go do some work, and then they feel comfortable talking about it, you know. It doesn't, for me, I think, make a splash. You know, I'm trying to get out more and advertise all the work I've done. I mean, you hear about all these people, AUVSI, Small UAV Coalition. I mean, are they writing language into bills? Are they up on the Hill? I ask about them all the time, and they say they've never been there. You know, I have heard some more names now that I've been up there, because I think those people were watching where I went, and they had their lobbyists and legal team go and meet with these people. But what good was it? I've met with that person probably 10 times. You know, so it's frustrating. It's frustrating to hear about companies that don't want to change the laws, but they have no problem complaining about them. You know, they've been sold a bit of bad goods from other folks, and I'm sorry you guys, you know, got bad service, but it wasn't like you weren't warned. And so, you know, I'm out here again, once again, you know, truthful legislation, I call it, smart policy.
Rob, one of the things that would be interesting to look back at is, you know, you mentioned 2014, and I would actually credit 2014 as the rise of the clone, the Chinese industry in autopilots, and the loss of autopilots from the American manufacturing pool. That was basically when Department of Commerce came in and interfered with the ability of a particular American drone maker's ability to make autopilots and drones and export them out of the US. And what that did was set up a massive vacuum around the world, which set up Chinese manufacturing to actually compete with America. And no,
those 3DR machines are made in Mexico, so they weren't like they were US anyways, with Chinese chips. And then you got Chris Anderson stealing the whole show and throwing yacht parties. You know, I don't really think he spent his money wisely. He's an idiot.
Look, ignoring that side, which I will refrain from as much as I would love to involve myself in that conversation. The fact of the matter is that the inability to sell that hardware in 2014, what happened in 2015 is another topic altogether, caused the technology to spread around the world far faster than they possibly could have by allowing that to still be happening within the US. That policy had a direct impact on the number of autopilots coming from around the world. Now, just a little stat for you. We had a ArduPilot developer conference in Canberra, and we had something around 27 people turn up, 27 developers, which was really cool. Nice, cozy developer meet. Love those things. Get to catch up with all these guys we only talk to on the internet. We have the same meetings in China, and we have like 500 people turn up. Now, it's obviously not quite as cozy. It's a little bit more formal and et cetera, but that industry is just huge over there. So if they're really worried about propagation of technology and stuff like that, they really, unfortunately, screwed up 4 or 5 years ago at the latest. We're probably really talking 30, 40 years ago.
Yeah. No, ITAR's been around a lot longer than that.
Yeah, exactly. ITAR, it's the biggest motivation for countries outside of the US to actually develop stuff. It's like, well, there's good stuff there. We could partner with the US. We can't get it, so we'll develop it ourselves. And guess what? We get to the point that we're better than the US anyway. So I think the US government has a lot to answer for in these issues in itself. But anyway, I'm off topic on that one, on a bit of a rant.
Well, no, that's
Trump will make America great again.
Well, let's steady, gentlemen, steady on the tiller. Let's not go too far there. But ITAR has, because not only the frightening thing is, not only is it you know, you build and sell the stuff and you're subject to it. If you have the idea as well, that's what's more frightening. It's just the very idea. And I know of 2 autopilot manufacturers that went overseas and had their ideas, and then their ideas belonged in the country that they had their ideas. And if they'd had those ideas in America, if they'd written it down in America, it would have belonged to the American government, and they could have pulled that to code. I have been sent some software this week to review, and it's very interesting. it's ITAR restricted, and it's just simulation software for making drones, and it's from America, and it's ITAR restricted. So straight away, it's flipping. We were talking before we started about non-disclosure agreements. I don't like non-disclosure agreements because if somebody doesn't trust me enough that I have to sign a non-disclosure agreement, and I'd rather not actually do business with them. I'd rather not. I'm not interested. You should trust the person enough, and that's what that sort of makes you feel when you have to sign stuff for ITAR. It's like, whoa, whoa, hang on. I know I'm going off topic now myself, but it's an issue. It has been an issue, and I hear what you're saying there, Philip. It has allowed the doors to open for a particular manufacturer to potentially do what everyone thinks they've done.
I mean, I'm worried about the future of the U.S. Patrick and I speak all the time about defense and some of higher level futuristic experimental projects that the U.S. government works on, and we both have came to the assumption that a lot of that for the first sequestration was done away with, and that we've just forgotten about innovation like 10 years ago. So that's a problem. And then, at the core roots, we should be starting in our schools and educating. I'm big in education, that there's not nearly enough support for people who want to be in robotics as there is for someone who wants to play sports, and that's a problem, and that's not going to change. I see it all the time.
But that's here as well. Every parent here thinks their child's going to play, for instance, that's where we came in, cricket. And then when you play Australia, then it's all rules are off. Everyone thinks their child's going to be the #1 sports star and don't think for a second about arts and technology, really. Just a few parents do. Now I'm ranting over. Look, we're 6 minutes past the hour. I've gone into the rantosphere. Did anyone else see anything else before we head off? Going once. Going once, going twice. Gentlemen, thank you very much. It's been very interesting. Very grim subjects tonight, really. I hope it. Oh, hang on. What's he got there in his hand? Hang on. He's got a box. What have you got there, Philip? You've got two of them. They're in stereo. Is it better in stereo? Oh, is that a smaller version of the? Yeah, all right. If it's show and tell, okay. Yeah. Okay, so is that the smaller version of the Cube?
It's the smaller version of the carrier board. It's got pretty much all the same plugs, just arranged in a way that allows me to use a little bit less board space. So still dual power inputs. Same number of outputs, but laid out in a different way. So you've got 6 auxiliary outputs individually pinned there and your normal 8 at the end there. You've got all the same plugs on the bottom, just not dual plugs for like this, a single CAN plug, not dual, et cetera, et cetera. So a little bit smaller. And we will be having a shorter version of the Cube coming soon, where basically if you're putting it on something like a rover or something where you don't care about redundancy and vibration isolation, you can do away with the top half of the Cube and go a little bit smaller.
Okay, and
so you could gather up your partners and with Christian there and build yourself a second model of that and call it the Secure Flight Controller and run it through the the gauntlet here in the U.S. and then you'll take the whole military market worldwide.
Look, I'll have an announcement to make on that one soon, but not quite yet. We will be doing a US manufactured version of the Cube soon.
Oh, there we heard it here. We heard it here at the end of play. Yeah. Is that specifically for American security concerns?
It's specifically for people that are concerned about the source of the hardware, and yeah.
Right. Well, then to be contentious, how do you make sure how do you have control over every single little part?
Look, we don't, and neither do Boeing, and neither do Airbus, neither do any of the other manufacturers. But what we do have is the ability to verify that chips genuinely are blank when they arrive to us. That there isn't drone-specific tracking code or anything like that on a chip before it gets to to us, which is actually pretty easy to do on an existing one because everything's open source. You can completely blank that chip, and if you really want to check it, you can go and put it under an electron scanning microscope and verify all the bits are where they're meant to be. And you can blank it and then go and put ArduPilot on there by yourself, and you know you've got trusted code that you can actually verify. So you can do that right now, but for some people that's still not enough. They want to make sure that it's physically assembled in the US as well. So we will be adding that facility soonish.
Gosh, there must be enough people. Yeah, but there must be enough people that make it worthwhile doing that. There'd have to be quite a few, I would have thought.
There are a lot of people asking for that at the moment. So yeah.
Gosh, yeah.
And I was one of the first when they asked me. The government asked me. I contacted Philip. I don't know when that was. That was months ago, 6, 7.
Yeah, it was a while ago. Yeah.
Oh, there we go. We heard it here first. All right, this time haven't got my hammer. Going once, going twice. Gentlemen, thank you very much. Very interesting. Lots of ground covered there. I hope, dear viewer, you can join us at 2100 GMT next Tuesday. I'm sorry, I have been bad with the comments tonight. I've been trying to pay attention. I don't often do that. So thanks very much. Join us again. Like, subscribe, do all those things, especially on the tube and you. Blah blah blah. Thanks very much. Thanks, guys. Thanks for your time. Cheers, eh? Bye bye.
So, yeah.
Bye bye.